Hello there, I'm the student, and in this video I'm going to show you why rural settlements are way better than towns or cities in EU5. And to show you why, I played just a little game over here as Provence for just 60 years. You can see 1400 exactly, and yeah, you can see if you zoom in that there is one single city in my entire country basically, and everything else is rural settlements, including the ones that start as a city, such as Provence itself or Arles over here. I actually downgraded them, and I'm going to show you why in a second. But first of all, let's just quickly go over the actual thing of location ranks. First of all, what is a location rank? There are 3 different ranks that a location can be, and it basically tells you how urbanized that location is, right? So it starts off with a rural settlement, which basically means it's just a few villages and nothing else. And then there is the second rank, which is a town that you can see in difference to the rural settlements. The town unlocks a number of pops in that location. Very specifically, clerics and nobles are available in every location anyways, but very specifically burghers, which are only available in towns or cities. You can see basically a city is the 3rd rank, just a better version of the town basically. So with going even further into the urbanized areas. The thing is that there is a difference, not only because of the modifiers. You can see rural settlement over here gives maximum RGO size plus 100%, which is insane, and food production and population growth, which town and cities actually they give negative food production, so there's a big difference over there. But then again, you can see there is max control, and you unlock the burghers, and you unlock a few buildings actually that you can't build in rural locations, although there are a few buildings such as, for example, the peasant buildings over here that you can't build in towns either. But yeah, generally speaking, what the general idea is that a location rank, the ranking system, is actually meant to represent that a rural settlement is like the lowest end of anything, and then it gets better if you get a town, and then even better if you get a city, right? But this is not really the case when it comes to the actual game and how to actually get an economy out of these locations. And the first thing that I want to talk about, why even have one city? Because yeah, even though I said rural settlements are better, I'm going to tell you why in a second as well, but I also have one city, which is my capital city, and that is a very important part of this entire strategy to understand that you need to have at least one city. It doesn't necessarily have to be your capital, but I would recommend it because you unlock some extra special buildings in your capital. So you really want to have one town or city at least, right? That is very well controlled. So either your capital or close to your capital, because you need a place where you can produce certain goods. So for example, dyes over here. If you don't have any provinces producing dyes, you won't get them unless you build such a, dye maker in your capital or in your city basically, right? So there are some goods that you can't produce if you don't have them in any location, right? And therefore you need at least one town, or basically my recommendation would be have exactly one town for exactly that purpose of producing goods that, are very special and very, you need them sometimes, but they don't really earn you a lot of money. So for example, the dye maker over here, you need it for something, right? For some buildings, for some armies maybe later. But you can see it is giving me barely a profit over here. So you don't want to upgrade that like to the maximum because it doesn't give you anything, but you want to have it at some place, okay? If you know what I mean. So that is basically why you want one city and one probably well-developed city, right? With a lot of burghers in it. Then after that, you have all of the goods unlocked. You can build everything you want. You have a decent amount of trade capacity because of burghers' marketplaces that you can only build in towns or cities. And then at that point, you might ask yourself, but why shouldn't I do that with every location, right? Or at least with a few more locations, right? It couldn't hurt to make Provence itself a city, by the way, which starts as a city. Make it a city as well as Marseille is and build more of these buildings. And that's where it gets actually tricky. Let me talk about the general idea of running an efficient country in EU5. If you have a look on Castile, for example, it's a pretty good example. That's why I'm choosing it. You can see Castile has a population, overall population of 3.8 million. Okay, now of course, most of you might know by this point, they have 266 locations, by the way, which if you go to myself, you can see I've hit 19 locations, okay, and only 400,000 population. The reason why Castile is not completely broken, right? So for example, if I have a look on the income, I'm almost making the same income, right? So I'm making like 80% of his income. Even though I have so few population and so few locations. And the reason for that is, of course, the control in the beginning of the game. And I'm talking especially for this strategy for the first 100 to 200 years, where control looks a little like this over here in Castile. What that basically means is Castile has 4 million population, yes. But effectively, they can only control this part of it. Okay, so I just clicked through the locations a little bit, like 90,000 the capital over here, 11,000, a big one over here, 70,000, 17, 11, 11, 20, and so on, right? So let's just say in this area over here, there's maybe 1 million, okay, if even, but let's just say there's 1 million pops living in this area over here, which is basically the controlled area of the Castilian crown. Everything else, even those 32s over here, Toledo, for example, pretty big town, and a lot of buildings as well, as you can see, with 32 control even, it's giving them 0.9 per month. So literally nothing. And those 17s over here, you can see, they are giving them 0.08. This is like, it just doesn't matter, okay? So from his 4 million population, he has effective control over maybe 1 million, okay? And now that you understand that there is a limit of controlled population that you can have, right? So we're not talking about the entire population, right? I could just conquer the entire world. I had like 400 million population. But we are talking about controlled population, and that doesn't only include control, but also accepted cultures, which, by the way, if you don't have accepted cultures, you can't even make those provinces full cores, which reduces the maximum control even further, right? Yeah, and you can't assimilate everything. You can't convert everything. So if you start to conquer, you'll have land that you literally get nothing from, okay? And therefore, we have to talk about the effective population, the controlled population of your country. And if we are talking about the controlled population, let me just go back to the control map mode of Castile. What you basically want to do is you want to manage your controlled population as efficient as possible, so that then, you know, with that limited amount of controlled population, you still get a huge amount of impact for your country, right? So, for example, those 80s, and of course the capital itself, 100, those have to be the locations where you make the majority of your money from, where you make the majority of your manpower from, and so on. And therefore, what you really want in an ideal scenario is you want this entire population of this entire controlled area to work at some place. Okay, so for example, Burgos over here, the capital, has 90,000 pops, which is a lot. And they have 100% control over it. Okay, so potentially they could actually control 90,000 people directly without any maluses, okay? But you can see they only taxing them 1.5. 1.5 from a location with 100 control and a fourth of my entire population. They're getting 1.5 off of that. The reason for that is very, very simple. Literally very simple. You can see there are 75,000 peasants living over here. So 80% of the entire location population. 75 out of 90,000 are not working anything. They are not employed. Okay, they are not giving you any taxes. You can see the commoners, they're giving them 0.6, even though there are 75,000 of them living here. And by the way, most of that is probably even going from laborers over here, because these are the only ones that are actually employed and doing something alongside with the burghers, which by the way give them even less, right? The ideal scenario is you want something to happen like in Toulon over here. It is a rural location. I'm going to talk about that in a second as well, why that is so perfect for this. But this location has 17,000 pops, and 90% of this entire population is employed and working at some place. So you can see 10,000 laborers are working in, the RGO. And then we have another 6.6 thousand peasants working in peasant buildings, such as fishing villages and market villages. And therefore, you can see there's like 1.6k, 250, 500, and then, 100 of clerics and nobles not working, which is like 10% maybe of this entire population in this province. And you can see this province is actually giving me directly 8.4 ducats per month. And that is with the tax of 7 ducats for the commoners and 1.4 for the nobility, which scales with the base tax. And the base tax is so high because there is so many people employed and working over here. You can see RGOs, buildings and so on count for that. Available pops, so peasants that are not working, do not count for that. Okay, they give you nothing. And this means that this rural settlement, not a city, the lowest location rank possible, with less than 20,000 pops, is making 5 times as much money as the capital of Castile, which is a town and has 90,000 pops. And now we might have to talk about why that is so perfect in rural locations versus cities. Because now you could say, yeah, but what if I get like a city to be fully employed, right? Of course, I could get like 20,000 burghers in a city. No, not really. So first of all, there is like 2 problems basically. The first problem is building numbers. There is a potential, this is already a city, so the maximum, even like the maximum possible, right? And quite a lot of population already. See, this city has a buildings maximum of 137, which is mostly coming from the city location rank. And I'm already filling 40 of that, okay? Which means that I could actually get another almost 100 buildings in this province. If we have a look at the buildings for the burghers, you can see that all of these are, this is on level 2. So one level of building is employing 200 burghers. Now let's just say I build 100 more buildings, which would be difficult because, for example, over here, there is a maximum of 11 papermaker skill, for example. So I can't build more than that. And yeah, but let's just say I managed to build 100 more burghers only buildings, or maybe also laborers, because I can build some buildings for them as well. First of all, they would be barely making any money. So you can see they are almost not making any money right now. And if I build several of them, then of course the market price of those goods is going to go down, and therefore they are probably going to get unprofitable pretty fast. But let's just say all of them would stay profitable, and I would build 100 more buildings to get to the maximum in a city location rank, and then multiply that 100 buildings with 200 burghers per building. that would give me an additional 20,000 burgers, okay? I can't build more than that, right? I can't build more buildings at that point. And that would mean that if you take 20,000 peasants off of this peasants estate over here and put them into burghers, and let's just say they would be all employed, which they wouldn't because they would become unprofitable. But let's just say they would. Even at that point, okay, with like thousands of ducats spent on the buildings, I would still have 7,000 peasants unemployed, not doing anything. And I literally can't employ them because you can't build any peasant buildings in cities or towns. And then of course, if the town grows and more people are, you know, being born, I can't employ them either because I'm at the maximum of the building level. And then we also have to talk about the taxability of burghers versus commoners tax. You can see the commoners tax right now is at a maximum of 44, which is mostly because of the additional 10% that I get because the peasants' political power is so low. You can see because they are 20% below the needed 25 for them to not have any penalty. Because they are 20% below that, they actually give me half of that, so 10% additional maximum tax. And you can see 426,000 commoners are giving a total of, you know, a little bit more than 10 base political power. And for example, my crown over here has 110 base political power. So in relation, this is literally nothing, okay? But if you have a look at the burghers, for 8,000 burghers, they are already getting 16 base power. So with an additional 20,000 burghers, this would obviously be at like, you know, around 55 additional like total power, right? So base power, and then modified by all of these privileges. And yeah, at that point, they would probably have like 20%, maybe even 25% crown power and or estate power, and therefore I wouldn't get any maximum tax from that you know, power. And if they get above 25%, which they actually can if you played as a republic or something, you often have the problem that the burghers are way above 25% power. Then you can see that over here on the nobility, you even get negative maximum tax for that estate. And therefore, the commoners are basically the way better estate to make money with, because it doesn't matter how many of them you employ, the power will be so low anyways. Whereas if you get more and more burghers, their power will be relevant at some point, same as for the nobility. And that is why it's so efficient to scale on rural locations instead of in cities, because you can literally employ everyone you want because of the RGO size being so high. As I said, rural locations gives 100% maximum RGO size. So in Marseille over here, if that were a rural location, I would get 14 of those RGOs that I could employ. And on top of that, I can build peasant buildings and laborer buildings, which all employ 1,000 per building instead of only 200 for the burghers. So I can employ a way larger population with way less buildings, which is a good thing because of the building limit again, right? The building limit is literally what holds you back from employing everyone, because you don't have enough buildings to employ everyone. That problem is not existent in like rural settlements, because every building you build gives 1,000 employment, possible employments, and therefore, yeah, like with the maximum of, you can see 25 buildings over here plus the 10 RGO size, you can already in this location right here already employ a maximum of 35,000 people at the same time, fully employed, 35,000. And then if you have that number, 35,000, the RGO size is going to increase as your number grows, and therefore you can employ even more and so on, right? So for example, on the Provence province over here, You can see that is way bigger, which actually has 50,000 population, and I am already at the building maximum. You can see I can have 28 buildings, and I do have 28 buildings already. But you can also see that the RGO size over here is actually 13, which means that the total number of buildings, that's like 28,000 plus 13,000 makes a total of 31,000 employed people out of 48,000 population, which is like, you know, 70% of the entire location. And this is a really, really big one. You can see over here we have 25,000 only. Plenty of room for more buildings, so I can easily employ everyone with the money slowly invested. Same over here, 33,000, well under the buildings limit. And yeah, I can easily build 15 more buildings, as you can see, and employ literally everyone in this province as well. Then there is one more thing, which is the price change of RGO, so base goods versus luxury goods that the burghers produce. So for example, over here, the furniture that is produced in this building is actually unprofitable. Okay, so you can see they have to buy for way higher, or like for the same price as they can sell the furniture that they're producing. And that is because every single luxury good is really, it doesn't really have that much of a demand in a market, you know, especially in the very beginning of the game, where there are very few burghers and nobles in like all of the world. Basically most of that is peasants, and they don't demand anything of that, so they don't want furniture, and therefore if you produce that, there is a very low market price for that good because nobody really wants that, right? Whereas the base goods, so for example food, will always be needed. Let's just show it on the salt over here. You can see the base price of salt is 4 ducats, and there is a huge surplus on the you know, supply versus demand in the Genoa market, and this drops the price a lot. It's currently at 2.5 instead of 4 because of the high supply versus demand. But you can still see that every expansion of this RGO gives me a profit per level of 2 ducats. Okay, and that is literally because the prices, the market prices of base goods are way more stable than the market prices of luxury goods. So therefore, I can just expand the RGOs everywhere, and even if it just gives me like 1 ducat of profit or even less than that, it will never, never, never be unprofitable. And therefore, I will always have the number of RGOs that I expanded fully employed with laborers that then pay taxes to me, because only employed people, of course, pay taxes. This is why if you have a look on my provinces, what they actually produce, you can see Provence over here giving me 10 ducats per month. This province over here, which produces silk, very valuable, of course, to have very rare or very expensive trade goods in your RGOs, which you can actually see if you know choose your starting location. So let's just go to the goods map mode over here. If you play as Hungary, for example, what you would ideally want is you would want to place your capital next to trade goods that are really valuable. So for example, over here you have gold, and silver. So it would be perfect to just place your capital on a crappy good, such as this wine province over here, as the price of wine is anyways pretty low. Now place your capital there, and then have directly adjacent to that these juicy gold provinces, you know, fully expanded, as you can see, and earn a lot of money off of that, right? And over here you have copper as well, which is quite profitable. And over there, you don't want to place your capital over here because there is only crappy trade goods around that. Iron is already quite good at horses, so maybe you want to place your capital here if you conquer a little bit of Austria. Then you have silver, iron, and horses right next by. So this is basically what you want to see. You want to have your capital in a crappy trade good and then have all the other adjacent provinces as rural settlements with fully expanded RGOs and fully expanded peasant buildings for maximum employment. And yeah, if we compare this right now, if you have a look on Aragon, for example, double the population that I have, and they have just less base tax, 118, whereas I have 148. And yeah, Castile over here, as I said, they have like 10 times almost the population, but only, you know, not even double the base tax as I have. And yeah, therefore, for example, I'm making more money than Aragon over here. I'm making, as I said, a lot more money compared to Castile as you might think. And same for Naples, for example. They have 4 times more troops, but only like 50% more base tax. And the last thing, obviously, that I want to talk about is food. Because you can also see that every single province, you can see this one, plus 25. This province plus 200 food. This one over here plus 65. And this one on the east plus 45. Because burghers in like towns are basically the biggest source of your food loss. And of course in towns, as I said, you have the negative food production. Whereas in rural locations you have a positive food production modifier. And you can see every peasant building, or most peasant buildings, will actually give a lot of food while giving you taxes. So they're giving you taxes and food, which basically means that right now I'm not buying food, I'm actually selling food. And this is actually a huge impact also for logistics of wars and, you know, basically not have your provinces starving in if you have a standing army. But honestly, the food thing is just the lowest thing on this entire list of arguments why you want to have rural locations above cities and towns. And once again, I'm talking about specifically the scalability of the scaling your economy in the early game of first 100, 150, maybe 200 years. And then after that, you can slowly start getting more and more towns because you have more possibilities to get control over areas that are further away and so on. So yeah, I hope you understand what I mean by that, and I hope this demonstration of this enormously deft up rural location Provence over here has helped you understand why to scale rural locations instead of cities or towns in the early game. But anyways, this is it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we are going to see, as always, on another Monday.